Good evening, everybody, and it's great to be together again at the Foggy Bottom Peace Quest Forum with me, Hashim El-Tinay. It's a monthly grassroots conversation, the second Wednesday of each month here in Foggy Bottom. And it's an exercise in grassroots democracy, giving voice to the people. Our discussion tonight is Exclusion or Embrace, Whither the Human Race, and this is series number 4 for this year. I'll be speaking about 3 topics tonight. The passing of the American activist and iconic folk singer Seeger, who left us in January, and then President Obama's State of the Union address, some remarks, and then the third point is the Afro-Arab quest for liberation and what's happening in on the Nile Valley, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, but also Syria and Central African Republic, etc. So please welcome. Great to see the faithful, and happy to be with you. And let's start. So Pete Seeger, he was born in May 3rd of May 1919, and he passed on the 27th of January 2014. He was an American folk singer and activist, and a peace activist actually for that. And by the way, on a personal note, he's one of the people who I love to listen to, and I used to buy his albums when I was a student in Paris in the 60s, and especially some of his songs that are critical, of the capitalist system and of the war machine, in America and in the West. I remember, his songs, little boxes, little boxes, little boxes, all the same. There is also Guantanamera. And then another one, it's called What Did You Learn Today in School? Little Boy of Mine. Always on the side of social and economic justice, and critiquing, the policies that are rooted in violence and in war. So he very much, and the most important actually contribution was when he mainstreamed We Shall Overcome, which actually became the official kind of song of the civil rights movement in the 60s in the United States, and became the official cry, and song of the march of 1963, in which Martin Luther King, just around here in this neighborhood, gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. So just quick information about Pete. He was a prolific songwriter. Best known songs include Where have all the flowers gone? And then he was also one of the folk singers most responsible for popularizing the spiritual "We Shall Overcome," as I said a little bit earlier, and recorded with John Baez, which also another icon of the 60s. And his early work, he went, he was sent away at 4, at the age of 4, to boarding school. But he came home 2 years later when his parents learned the school had failed to inform them he had contracted a scarlet fever, showing you parenting and how closely the parents watched their son. Anyway, he also his parents were musicians as well, and they experienced beauty of music firsthand when he was deeply affected after learning basic strokes from in his guitar. He spent much of the next 4 years trying to master the 5 sitting banjo, and during the entire they had a trip to the countryside, and during the entire trip the group never ate once in a restaurant. They slept out at night under the stars and cooked their own meals in the open. Very often they were the guests of the farmers. At rural affairs and union meetings, the farm women would bring suppers and would vie with each other to see who could feed the troop most. And after the affair, the farmers would have earnest discussions about who would have the honor of taking them home for the night. So this is an experience between the rural, between the urban people going to the rural areas and finding the generosity and the hospitality of the rural people. His early activism in 1936, at the age of 17, Pete Seeger joined the Young Communist League, then at the height of its popularity and influence. In 1942, he became a member of the Communist Party USA itself, but left it in 1949. I suppose creative people always find it very hard to stay with bureaucracies, even when the bureaucracies express some of their idealism. Anyway, it's many people around the world have gone through these things, going with a party and then leaving the party and stuff like that. In the spring of 1941, the 21-year-old Seeger performed as a member of the Almanac Singers along with Millard Lambell. And then in June 1941, there was a review in Time magazine which had become very interventionist and denounced the almanac, John Doe accusing it of scrupulously echoing what it called the mendacious Moscow tune that Franklin Roosevelt is leading an unwilling people into a G.P. Morgan war. And Eleanor Roosevelt, a fan of folk music, reportedly found the album in bad taste, though President Roosevelt, when the album was shown to him, merely observed that few people would ever hear it. Anyway, there was the McCarthy period in America, which was, very controversial part. So Pete Seeger in 1955, in the 50s, and consistently throughout his life, actually, he continued his support of civil and labor rights, racial equality, international understanding, and anti-militarism, all of which had characterized his work. And he continued to believe that songs would help people achieve these goals. So he used, his gifts to sort of advocate and teach and educate and enlighten people against wars and against violence. And now, here we have our Peace Quest Forum, which is shows you, the universality, of the yearning of the people, of all times, and with all, regardless of their color or where they are born and so on, for peace and social and economic justice. And then came the war in Vietnam, and at that period, Pete was a long-standing opponent of the arms race and of the Vietnam War, of course. And he used his popularity and songs against the President Johnson and the escalation of the war against the Vietnamese people. That's the time also when people like Muhammad Ali, refused to be drafted and to go in to fight in Vietnam. And when he said, Vietnamese people have done nothing to me, against me, why should I go and kill them? So Pete Seeger was on the right side of history in that fight. So President Obama argued that the money saved by simplifying the tax code could then be invested in repairing and building bridges, roads, ports, and other key infrastructures. Obama claimed that a first-class infrastructure was necessary to attract businesses and economic growth. It was on this note that he also indicated his willingness to use executive action when necessary to move his agenda. He stated that he would use his executive authority to streamline the bureaucratic process in approving infrastructure projects. This was just one highlight as President Obama gave his 2014 State of the Union speech. This emphasis on executive action continued in another proposal when he called for an increase to the federal minimum wage. Obama noted that congressional action would be necessary to formally change the federal minimum wage from the currently $7.25 to $10.10. But he called on state legislators to not wait for Congress and raise the rates in their individual states. He also said that he had issued an executive order requiring that all contracted federal workers be paid a minimum of $10.10. He stated that no one working full-time should have to raise a family in poverty. Finally, Obama emphasized the role of technology in growing the economy. He called on Congress to undo the sequestration cuts from last year that scaled back government research grants. He noted that the United States is closer to energy independence than it ever has been, and he drew attention to the role natural gas extraction has played in that. He called natural gas the bridge fuel that could sustain the United States economy until green energy alternatives were available. In relation to this topic, Obama declared that the debate is settled and that climate change is a fact. He also touched on student loan debt, and he said it now exceeds a total of $1 trillion in the United States. As Obama transitioned from the economy to other domestic topics, he drew attention to the state of the U.S. education system. He argued that access to education was key in creating future economic opportunities and renewed the call he made last year for Congress to establish universal pre-kindergarten nationwide. Obama also noted that the increasing number of students with large amounts of college loan debt and made mention of his plan to grade colleges, issuing scorecards that would be determined in part by the amount of debt their students graduate with and their ability to find employment after graduation. Obama then made brief comments on a series of other domestic issues. He called on Congress to pass a comprehensive immigration reform before the end of 2014, and he announced a new federal retirement proposal called MyRA. He then briefly commented on the positive aspects of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, noting its popular provisions such as guaranteed coverage for pre-existing conditions and the ability of children to remain on their parents' plans for a longer period of time. He concluded his remarks on domestic issues with brief comments on the Voting Rights Act and the recent episodes of gun-related violence. The Guantanamo Bay detention facility, on that one, he said in the final portion of his speech, he dealt with military operations and other defense issues, including the Guantanamo Bay detention facility. He noted that U.S. troops have been fully withdrawn from Iraq and would be fully withdrawn from Afghanistan shortly. He said this was not the end of anti-terrorism efforts, but that Americans must move off a permanent war footing. He called once again for the permanent closure of the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center, a goal that he stated before he even first took office in 2008. Obama also said that U.S. citizens must have confidence in government surveillance programs and that efforts would continue to reform those programs. He then commented on diplomatic efforts overseas. He expressed the hope that the people of Syria would be free and from dictatorship, but did not call specifically for the removal of President Bashar al-Assad. He declared that a state should exist for the Palestinian people, but that a Jewish state of Israel must also exist and be secure. Finally, he stated to Congress that they must allow negotiations with Iran to go forward, and that he would veto any renewed sanctions against that country so long as the diplomatic process was ongoing. He was clear, however, that the goal is to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and that if diplomacy failed, Obama would be the first to demand new sanctions and other actions if necessary. He concluded his speech with the story of a wounded soldier and his road to recovery. He likened this soldier's struggles with those of the United States as a whole. Obama said that even if the road is hard, America never gives up. It was on this note that he ended the speech. President Obama's 2014 State of the Union speech highlighted the state of the economy and his proposals to improve the middle class in the coming year. So that's basically what I have to, to share with you tonight about the State of the Union speech of Obama. And then the last thing is just a few remarks about the Afro-Arab quest for liberation and freedom and dignity and democracy. And, on that, I will just speak about, the violence in Egypt. There is a revolution in Egypt, and revolutions are violent, unfortunately, oftentimes. That's why we emphasize peace culture and peace education, because they don't have to be violent all the time, because a lot of people are lost in these revolutions, and but it takes a lot of education and training for people to actually bring about peaceful change. It's not an easy thing. So anyway, so we see, Morsi elected, but then, not being able to actually govern, and then the Muslim Brothers and their agenda being, kind of contested and not working with other people who have different perspectives from them, and just focusing on empowering their members. And of course, this galvanized the anger and the discontent on all the other fringes of society and all the other parties of the Egyptian society, which made a second revolution, on June the 30th, and there was a historic popular demonstration, that the world has never seen before in Cairo, and this was considered by the military as a cry of the people for some kind of a solution to the problem, because clearly the way the Muslim Brothers were running the country was taking the country, according to many Egyptians, towards civil war and towards very polarized religious project of society. And this is really the issue now in the Muslim world, the discredit of the so-called Islamist approach or Islamist paradigm. And the debate is still going on, but it's clear that more and more with the wars, the violence perpetrated by Al-Qaeda and all the extremist kind of groups have also discredited, those who call for an Islamic project of society. And the experiences in Sudan and other places leave a lot to be desired when we think of them or evaluate them from a perspective of human rights, and fundamental freedoms and social justice and transparency and good governance perspectives. So anyway, Egypt is crucial and pivotal in the Middle East and in the Arab world and in Africa, and of course, the army being the most organized part of society made use of this mess in the streets, and of course came in to save the day somehow, but used incredibly violent tactics, and many people were massacred, and then declared the Muslim Brothers a terrorist organization, and clearly Egypt is moving towards a more kind of autocratic culture, or reverting back to the autocratic regime, but the people who are for this change, again, the Muslim Brothers, base their argument on the fact that this is the army is just doing the will of the people, and it's saving the people from themselves, basically, and from making the mistake of letting the Muslim Brothers take the reins of power, in any society. And there is a lot of discussion about the Muslim Brothers and the nature of the Muslim Brothers, and what kind of Islam are they talking about, and are they really Muslims, or are they using Islam opportunistically for totally earthly objectives like wealth and power and glory, and that's what most of the people who study the Sudanese experiment, these are the conclusions, that these people have corrupted the country, they divided the country, they became a curse, on most of the people, except their cronies, of course, and all the wars, Darfur and Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile now, and then, of course, we go to the South Sudan and the outburst of violence there. So, and then the Central African Republic and the religious violence, and Boko Haram in Nigeria. So, a lot of, and then, of course, Syria, and the tragedy there. And it's amazing. I mean, throwing barrels, full of ammunition on civilians. I mean, what kind of regime, what kind of government is this? And the international community is watching and not doing anything about it. I mean, there are all these efforts with Secretary Kerry and so on, in terms of the conference in Geneva 1 and Geneva 2, and Lakhdar Ibrahimi and the UN, but clearly, people are, staying in hotels and talking in big halls in the Palais des Nations in Geneva, while the Syrians are being massacred by Bashar al-Assad, in the name of Syria. So, this is a very sad kind of reality of politics today, and but the quest for dignity and for freedom and for good governance and for peace is absolutely alive in the hearts and minds of all the Arab people and all the African people, regardless of their religion or race or language. And I think as the Arab Spring showed us, and as the South Africans have shown us, and I think we should ponder their example and should get inspiration from their example. And we spoke a lot, in this forum about Mandela when he passed, and his legacy, and the truth and reconciliation model that South Africa offered to the continent of Africa, but really to the whole world, that it should really be embraced and applied everywhere. And maybe that's the best way for people to actually realize their dreams of new societies that are respectful for the basic human rights and societies of the 21st century. So that's basically the points that I wanted to share with you tonight. And with that, I will open the discussion for the group, and let me have your comments and questions, and thank you for listening, and see you next month on the same forum, the Foggy Bottom forum, Peace Quest forum, and that will be also the theme Exclusion or Embrace, Whither, the Human Race. It will be number 5, and we will announce the specific topics that we will address in the coming days. Thank you, and let's continue for peace.